Hello, I'm Simon Good. I'm a professional mediator and trainer in conflict resolution skills. In this video, I'm going to explain a reasonably simple model of positive confrontations, how you can confront someone when they're doing something wrong or they're not doing something and you want them to do it. It's an area that a lot of people find quite difficult, whether it's the stress aspect. The thought of confronting a stranger, for example, is something that a lot of people find really challenging. Talking to people at work about something that they're doing that's causing an issue isn't always easy, and it's not always clear how to start or whether or not it's worth entering into this conversation. And a lot of people have had experiences raising issues with someone and they've become defensive and resistant and reactive, which then increases your levels of stress. And what can sometimes happen is it starts a bit of a negative spiral where you don't manage things as well as you could. The message that you give isn't well received by them. They get defensive and reactive, which then means that starts to spill back onto you, and you might feel more frustrated and overwhelmed as time goes on. So I'll explain a reasonably simple framework today, the what, ask, check model of confronting someone, and I'll go through a number of different examples, including dealing with a 6-year-old who's meant to be in bed and all of a sudden you find them jumping on their bed instead. I'll talk about managing an interaction with a staff member who's late for meetings, as well as dealing with a client who becomes aggressive and how you might be able to manage that during a phone call. So when I do the longer version of my conflict resolution skills training, I talk about these 5 different areas: conflict analysis, self-regulation, de-escalation skills, listening and clarification, as well as assertiveness and boundaries. And for positive confrontations, it really fits into this third category here of the assertiveness. So I suppose I just wanted to explain that this is what we'll be focusing on today. But typically, when I'm dealing with some of the situations that I'll use in the examples, I probably would have started at some of these other points. I wouldn't necessarily jump straight into the assertiveness and boundaries piece from the word go. So I mentioned that I'll be explaining a particular model of positive confrontations. It's basically this what, ask, check framework. The starting point is that we explain, well, what's the issue? What have they done and what's the consequence? The ask is where we're very clearly stating what we want them to do. Here we're focusing on behavior. And then the final stage of the model is check. Check for understanding, check for clarification that might be needed, identifying any issues that might come up, excuses that the person has, something that they're thinking about that you're not aware of. I want to gauge the level of buy-in, deal with any emotions that come up like frustration, exhaustion, disappointment, confusion, and then clarify any next steps. So I'll sort of walk through what each of those look like as we go through the different examples. This is based on a model that Barbara Patcher talks about in a book called The Power of Positive Confrontation. It's quite a good book. If you're looking for additional information about this particular topic, I would recommend it. I sort of adapt and change the model a little bit from the way that she uses it. And I think, though, it's a pretty good baseline in terms of giving general information, and it's quite a few different tips and techniques that are included in the book. I don't know if it's because I'm from Australia and maybe it's cultural difference. For me personally, I think I'd probably go about things a little bit different to how Patcher talks about it. But at the least, it's good, I guess, food for thought, especially if you're feeling stuck or not sure about how to deal with a particular situation that you're dealing with. So the first example that we'll be looking at is your 6-year-old. You want them to brush their teeth, you've asked them 12 times from the looks of it, and then you come in and find them jumping on the bed. I don't know if you've had to deal with this kind of situation yourself, but for me, I find this incredibly frustrating. So what some people do is they just talk about the what. What has the person done and what's the problem with that? I've asked you 12 times to brush your teeth. What the heck are you doing? I have to admit, when I'm feeling particularly tired or a little bit stressed or worked up, that might be the approach that I sometimes take. Now, if we just do the what have they done or what's the problem, it tends to trigger defensiveness. And the reason for that is that it comes across as criticism and blaming. And effectively, that's all that it is. I've asked you to do this and you haven't done it. Full stop. I suppose that in itself is criticism. The other mistake that sometimes people make is they just do the ask. Brush your teeth now or else, mate. All we do is the demand. It might not be clear to the other person that we're talking with, the background, like the fact that you've asked them a number of times, the importance of the task. It might not even be clear what you're asking them to do. Maybe you come in and say something like, it's really important that people clean up after themselves around here, rather than saying, it looks like there's some dishes on the sink, would you mind cleaning them up, please? Brush your teeth now or else. What happens for me is that tends to escalate further, and instead of just brush your teeth now or else, I say something like, brush your teeth now or else. And I usually count 1, 2, 3. My son usually hurries to do it before I get to 3, and I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do if I ever get to 3, but I count, often very angrily and as threatening as I possibly can. 1, 2, 2.5. Right, you're in big trouble. Don't you know you have school tomorrow? Don't complain to me when you wake up tired and you want more sleep. It's your own fault. I don't know if this resonates and sounds like the way that you might deal with some of these situations yourself if you have kids. Or maybe you've had a boss that just jumps into the ask and very quickly escalates. I guess in some situations it might be perfectly fine to just come across as very direct and maybe even a little bit harsh or aggressive. I know there's some kids in our neighbourhood and they often come in to our backyard because they want to play with my son. I've asked them a few times to ring the doorbell instead because I've got a dog, and when kids come into the yard she tends to freak out, and the last thing is I want is for her to get so scared that she ends up freaking out and biting one of them. And I mean, at the least, I don't want that distraction when I'm in the middle of something and my dog's losing it and they might leave the gate open and escape, etc. For those kids, I usually just say, guys, close that gate and come back in and ring the doorbell. Because my goal isn't really to de-escalate them, to maintain rapport in relationships. In fact, I don't really care what they think of me in many ways. And you might come across situations like that too. It's a stranger that you'll never encounter again. It probably doesn't really matter how you go about confronting them. For situations though where you have an ongoing relationship, a colleague at work, for example, a client or a customer that you want to give them a good experience, a family member or a friend, if we just do the ask, it's not just that it maybe results in a meltdown or a blow up in the moment. It often also means that it impacts your relationship. You don't feel as close. They feel a bit more annoyed by you. Maybe they're hurt about the fact that you didn't give them the benefit of the doubt before just losing your cool. There's all sorts of negative consequences that come along with this. And a common cause of it that people aren't aware of is that they're either just focusing on the problem, what the person's done, or just focusing on the ask. So if we look at building in all 3 of the different elements instead, what we're left with is something like's on the screen there. So I'd say to my son, Louis, mate, it's 8 o'clock and you still haven't brushed your teeth. I've asked you several times. Can you please stop jumping on the bed now and go and brush your teeth? Do you need help or are you okay to get it done? You can sort of see how this might be received quite differently. We explain clearly what they're doing and we either outline the background to the problem or maybe the consequence, the reason why it's an issue. Mate, it's 8:30 and if you stay up any later, I'm going to have to take away some of your iPad time tomorrow. And then we do the ask very specifically. Can you stop jumping on the bed and go and brush your teeth? And then the last stage is that check. Do you need any help or are you okay to get it done? You can ask that in an open-ended kind of way. Are there any problems with this? Are there any parts of what I've explained there not clear? You might say something like, is there anything that might come up that would get in the way of this happening? Do you need any assistance? Is there any support that you need from other members of the team, etc.? when we go into that check part, it's important to do it to some extent organically, but the important part is that question mark at the end. We don't want to do a check and just say, it should have been done by now. I wouldn't clarify that as a check. It's probably just building in another layer of threat. The check is like, would that be okay? If it's a family member or a friend, you just do it informally. If it's a staff member or client that you're dealing with, maybe a little bit more formal. Please let me know if you have any questions. Is there any other information that you need at this stage? So that's the first example, dealing with the 6-year-old. The second example that I'll talk through is a staff member who's consistently late for meetings. Now, to be perfectly honest, if I'm a manager and I have someone who's late, I probably wouldn't jump straight to confronting them about it. I would say, hey, just touching base, what's going on, how you're traveling at the moment. Maybe they've got young kids that they're managing, and getting to this meeting that begins at 9 o'clock isn't something that they can do consistently. So maybe a structural option would be just changing the time for the meeting. So for me, I'd probably ask it curiously first, look for structural or other options to fix the problem just in itself. If none of those solutions sort of are gaining much traction, then I might look at this positive confrontation model. I know a lot of leaders who start with something like, you're always late. This is the 3rd time you've been late, mate. I wanted to talk to you about it. It's not good enough. Of course, when we just approach it from the what layer, it tends to come across as criticism, judgment. We're not, acknowledging any of the contextual factors that might have contributed to the other person. So how it feels to them is like, I think you're an idiot, or I think that you don't care, or you're doing something unethical, which if it's a staff member I'm working with, often is the last thing I want them to feel, because I do have a lot of confidence and faith in their ability and their, ethical way of working as well. So you're always late, that's the what. Just doing the ask, maybe someone says, look, everyone else manages to be on time. I don't see why any reason you can't be here at 9 o'clock like you're supposed to be. I guess the more friendly version would just be saying something like, you need to make sure that you're on time for these meetings, mate. Or just saying, can you make sure you're on time? The problem there is that maybe the person doesn't realize what they've done. They aren't aware of the fact that you've all been sitting there waiting for them the past few times this meeting has been held. Maybe they're not aware of the fact that the starting time is actually firm. They think about it as more flexibly, and they're not aware that everyone else is in the room waiting for them. So just clarifying some of those facts might in itself start to solve the problem. If we just say, everyone else is on time, you need to be as well, then it tends to, make the person feel like they're not valued, acknowledged, and validated in the same way as if we acknowledge some of those contextual factors, or even just ask them what's going on. Is there a particular reason you've been late lately? So if we build in all three, it might look something like this. Hey, Sarah, I just wanted to touch base about these meetings. It's the 3rd time that you've been late this week. I know you're managing young kids and it can be tricky in the mornings. At the same time, it's causing issues on our end, because when you're late, we need your input in these meetings, and it often puts us in a spot where we can't make decisions that we need to. Are you able to be on time more consistently moving forward? So she might respond and talk then. If she just says yes, I might say, I just want to touch base. Are there any other options for meeting times that would work better? Or have you got any other ideas that might help? So I've named the issue. I don't want this to continue, that you're late for these meetings and we're waiting for you. In the check here, what I've done is open the door for future problem solving. Maybe having the meeting in an afternoon would be helpful. Maybe Sarah would prefer to provide input ahead of time. If you could send her an agenda or the list of issues that you'll be discussing, maybe it's not important that she's in the room with everybody else. So I'm sort of saying this is the problem, but starting to think about potential options in that collaborative way. I wouldn't necessarily always do that. In some situations, if it's a contractor, and again, I don't have much of an ongoing relationship, I might just be more clear. Look, this is the 3rd time that the delivery's been late. We really need them to be on time. Just want to touch base about the deliveries coming up over the next few weeks. Do you expect that they'll all be able to be delivered on as scheduled? And I want to be clear with you that if not, we might need to look for another supplier. That's the last thing we want, all the headaches and hassles of going through that. And to be honest, we'd like to still support your business as well. But if these deliveries continue to be late, that will be the position that we're left in. So the third situation is dealing with a client. Maybe they're becoming rude and aggressive on the phone. So the what that a lot of people turn to in the first instance is to say something like, if you keep speaking to me like that way, I'm going to hang up the phone. I know a lot of people feel quite justified in that. They have even been told something by their manager like, look, you're not expected to be treated that way. You're not a doormat to be walked over, etc. And so someone decides, well, I'm going to be more assertive and stand up for themselves. They do it in this way. If you swear it to me again, I'm going to hang up. What usually happens is the other person's still feeling very angry and upset. That might be the way they talk to everyone in their life. They might not even realize what the problem is. It's usually what happens is they swear or they're aggressive again, and then you do hang up. You might give them a few minutes to calm down, and then they call up again a little bit more apologetic. Or maybe they escalate further and get more angry and upset, lodge a formal complaint, storm into the office demanding to talk to someone. If you keep talking to me like that, I'm going to hang up the phone. It feels like a bit of a grappling for power with the other person, triggers that fight or flight response subconsciously, and you would often get a very strong reaction as a result. The ask, maybe people just say, I'm treating you with respect and I ask you to do the same to me. We haven't actually been clear about what the other person's done, what's the problem with their behavior, or even very specific about what we want them to do. The problem with respect is that we've all got a different idea of what respectful communication is, and if we just say something like, you need to treat me with respect, it's pretty unlikely that the other person will be fully in line with your expectations there. So let's have a look at the more complete version. We might say something like, for the what, look, you're speaking over the top of me now. I was going to explain other options when you jumped in. I'm happy to do my best to help you, but can you let me finish what I'm saying before responding? I'll do my best to listen to you when you're speaking as well. Is that something that we can agree to for this conversation? So a little bit more specific, you've interrupted me, you're jumping in over the top. That's the specific thing that I'm identifying. And what I'd like you to do is to stop interrupting me. You might do this more respectfully, more formally, depending on the person that you're dealing with. With my son, I might say, sorry mate, can I just finish what I'm speaking with there? I hadn't actually gotten out everything that I needed to. And then I'll give you a chance to say what you need to and do my best to listen as well. Would that be all right? More formally, I guess you'd say something like, look, this is the third time that I've sent you this email and we've had this kind of response for you. Using labels like unprofessional or, calling us a bunch of idiots isn't something that's productive. I would ask you to use different language moving forward, and if you're able to do that, then I'll do my best to see how we can help. So the what ask check would be the first positive confrontation step. And as a final point in the video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about holding on to boundaries if this escalates. I mentioned that a lot of people say something like, if you swear at me one more time, I'm going to end this conversation, or you'll be hearing from my lawyer, or I'm not going to talk to you about this anymore. I mean, as soon as we make these kind of ultimatums, of course it tends to escalate the situation. And depending on who you're dealing with and the context, that might not be what you actually want. The better way to do those kind of ultimatums is to frame it as a choice. So we would identify the positive option, what are they doing, and the consequence for that. If you continue to speak to me that way, like you've called me an idiot now a number of times, if you continue to speak that way, I'm going to end the call. Or, if you can speak to me differently, use different language, refrain from using that word, I'll do my best to see if I can help. It's a much better way of confronting someone about something that they're doing. Here's what you're doing, and here's the consequence if that continues. Or, if you can do something different, then this is the more better consequence for you. With my 6-year-old son, I might say something like, look mate, if you keep jumping on the bed and you don't brush your teeth, and it's 5 more minutes go by, I'm going to have to take away some of your iPad time tomorrow. Or if you can stop jumping on your bread and brush your teeth, then you'll still get the full time like you normally do. So we frame it as a choice, and the benefit of that is that it gives the person a sense of control, and we put the positive option second because that has the most prevalence in their memory and attention, and it tends to minimize the chances of it coming across as a threat and then resulting in a 6-year-old meltdown, a client formal complaint, a disagreement or dispute between staff, etc. So I hope that that's helpful for you, thinking about holding on to those boundaries by offering a choice. So the example that you can see on the screen there, if you continue to swear at me, I'll end the call. Or if we can keep the conversation respectful, I'll do my best to see what I can do to help. I hope that that's been helpful for you. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to respond. If you've got a difficult situation, a question around conflict resolution skills, a topic that you would like to feel more confident in, or you'd like some additional tools to deal with particular scenarios or situations that you encounter, I'd be more than happy to prepare a future video on that. This is a new YouTube channel, so I wonder if you'd be willing to press like and maybe even consider subscribing. That would make the world of difference to me because it lets the YouTube algorithm know that other people might be interested in this content. Stay tuned for future videos. Otherwise, all the best in your confrontations that you need to deal with. Bye for now.